This is Land of Havilah, John 11. Jesus' last known location was beyond the Jordan, meanwhile in Bethany, about 3 miles from Jerusalem, verse 1. Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus, from Bethany, of the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Comment: a brother and 2 sisters live in Bethany, Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. Lazarus was seriously ill. Verse 2. It was that Mary who had anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Comment: the account of Mary putting ointment on Jesus' feet is coming up in the next chapter. Verse 3. The sisters therefore sent for him, saying, Lord, behold, he for whom you have great affection is sick. Comment: John hasn't mentioned it until now, but Jesus already knows the 3 of them. He has great affection for them, as John is about to say. The sisters sent for Jesus. If he's still beyond the Jordan, he's at least 17 miles away. Verse 4. But when Jesus heard it, he said, This sickness is not to death, but for the glory of God, that God's Son may be glorified by it. Comment: Jesus' return message is, quote, This sickness is not to death, but for the glory of God, end quote. Verse 5. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. When therefore he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 days in the place where he was. Comment: after he got the message that Lazarus was sick, he sent a return message, but he stayed put for 2 more days. Verse 7. Then after this he said to the disciples, Let's go into Judea again. Comment: Bethany and Jerusalem are in Judea. He's going back to Judea. Verse 8. The disciples told him, Rabbi, the Jews were just trying to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered, Aren't there 12 hours of daylight? If a man walks in the day, he doesn't stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if a man walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light isn't in him. Comment: Jesus is saying, I know the right thing to do, so come what may, I'm going to do it. The message is that we should do what we know we ought to do and not worry about the consequences. If we walk in the light, we won't stumble. There might be some unpleasant consequences in doing the right thing, but God will give us ample reward. It's an act of faith to do what's right when it looks like it's going to cost us, and he loves faith. But, quote, if a man walks in the night, he stumbles because the light isn't in him. Verse 11. He said these things, and after that he said to them, Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going so that I may awake him out of sleep. The disciples therefore said, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he spoke of taking rest in sleep. Comment: the message is that for Christians, death is merely a sort of sleep. The disciples don't understand why Jesus has to travel to Bethany to wake up a sleeping man. Verse 14. So Jesus said to them plainly then, Lazarus is dead. I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe. Nevertheless, let's go to him. Comment: the purpose of this event is so that the disciples, including you and me, might believe that Jesus is the Christ, and that though we sleep, we will live. Verse 16. Thomas, therefore, who is called Didymus, said to his fellow disciples, Let's go also, that we may die with him. Comment: they called Thomas a nickname, Didymus, which means twin. He and the other disciples believe it's going to be suicide to go back to Judea, but they're not arguing. They say, quote, Let's go also, that we may die with him. Verse 17. So when Jesus came, he found that he had been in the tomb 4 days already. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 15 stadia away. Comment: Bethany was about 3 miles from Jerusalem. Verse 19. Many of the Jews had joined the women around Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. Comment: Lazarus has been dead for 4 days, and he's already buried, but there are still mourners at the house, women at the core tending to Mary and Martha, and men on the periphery. Verse 20. Then when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary stayed in the house. Comment: Mary stayed at the house while Martha left to meet Jesus on his way, as we find out. When Martha found him on his way, verse 21, Therefore Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you would have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Comment: there's nothing here about Martha weeping, maybe because she's already almost expecting a resurrection. Both her statements there were in faith. If you would have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. and even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give it to you. She has faith that Jesus can perform a resurrection, but she doesn't know if he's willing. It's not unheard of that a prophet would do it. Elijah did it once, and Elisha did it twice. 1 Kings 17, 2 Kings 4, and 2 Kings 13. Verse 23. Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Comment: that wasn't quite the answer Martha's looking for, because he might be talking about raising Lazarus in the general resurrection on the last day. So she says, verse 24. Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will still live even if he dies. Whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord. I have come to believe that you are the Christ, God's Son, who comes into the world." When she had said this, she went away and called Mary, her sister, secretly, saying, "The teacher is here and is calling you." Comment: Martha went away from Jesus' location and called Mary secretly, which seems to indicate she was trying to keep Jesus' presence a secret. He's in danger in Judea. Verse 29. When she heard this, she arose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was in the place where Martha met him. Then the Jews who were with her in the house and were consoling her, when they saw Mary, that she rose up quickly and went out, followed her, saying, "She is going to the tomb to weep there." Comment: Martha intended for only Mary to come, but all the mourners are following. This was according to providence, so that what's about to happen will be a public testimony. Martha's idea that this should be kept secret was a little bit divergent from the will of God. She was trying to do the right thing, keeping it private, but God wanted to make it public. Verse 32. Therefore, when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you would have been here, my brother wouldn't have died." Comment: Mary said letter for letter what Martha said. They both have faith. Verse 33. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews weeping who came with her, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled, and said, "Where have you laid him?" They told him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. Comment: Jesus wept even though he knew he was about to raise Lazarus. Death is hard, even if we know there's a resurrection coming. If Jesus wept, so can we. Weeping at a funeral doesn't indicate a lack of faith. Verse 36. The Jews therefore said, "See how much affection he had for him." Some of them said, "Couldn't this man who opened the eyes of him who was blind have also kept this man from dying?" Comment: Jesus' fame is widespread by now. At least some of the mourners knew exactly who he was. Verse 38. Jesus, therefore, again groaning in himself, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, "Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he has been dead 4 days." Comment: Martha has already said, quote, "Even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you." So she's aware that theoretically Jesus might perform a resurrection, but Jesus hasn't exactly agreed to it. Verse 40. Jesus said to her, "Didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see God's glory?" Comment: Jesus did tell her in the return message that the sickness wasn't to death, but for the glory of God. But she wasn't sure what he meant. He might have been talking about raising Lazarus on the last day. It seems like God always keeps us in suspense until the last minute. But when we look back on events and how he came through every time, there shouldn't have been any suspense in the first place, only faith. Verse 41. So they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying. Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you listened to me." Comment: Jesus has asked the Father to allow a resurrection, and the Father listened to him. "Thank you for listening," he says. Verse 42. "I know that you always listen to me, but because of the multitude standing around, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me." Comment: the purpose of these events is that we'll know God sent Jesus, and that he's capable of raising our bodies up where there's already been disintegration. Verse 43. When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." He who was dead came out, bound hand and foot with wrappings, and his face was wrapped around with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Free him and let him go." Comment, that was the reversal of Adam's curse of death. Free him and let him go. Verse 45. Therefore many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what Jesus did believed in him. But some of them went away to the Pharisees and told them the things which Jesus had done. Comment, some at the resurrection believed, but some reported it to the Pharisees. This implies that those doing the reporting don't believe in Jesus, and they're all in with the party line that somehow Jesus is a menace. Verse 47. The chief priests, therefore, and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, "What are we doing? For this man does many signs. If we leave him alone like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." Comment, they say we can't let him keep this up. Soon everyone will believe. We can't allow that. They're going to make him their leader. It's going to create a revolt against the Romans, and the Romans will come in and crush us. We have it good under the Romans. We'll lose our place if that happens. Ironically, the Romans would clamp down and destroy the nation about 40 years later, but it wasn't because of Christians, it was because of zealous Jews. Verse 49. But a certain one of them, Caiaphas, being high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you consider that it is advantageous for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation not perish." Comment, the high priest says there's no need even to discuss it. It's obvious we need to kill the man to save the nation. Verse 51. Now he didn't say this of himself, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but that he might also gather together into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. Comment, Jesus would die not just for Israel, but for all nations. Verse 53. So from that day forward they took counsel that they might put him to death. Comment, the Pharisees have been divided, but the ones who approve of Jesus have been almost silent or at most weakly supportive. John 9:16. They've been so weak that Jesus' opponents in the council aren't even aware that he has any supporters. John 7:48. Now the official position is that he should die. Verse 54. Jesus therefore walked no more openly among the Jews, but departed from there into the country near the wilderness to a city called Ephraim. He stayed there with his disciples. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand. Comment, Passover is at hand, which will be the Passover of the crucifixion. We're just past the halfway point of the book of John, so almost half the book will be focusing on his final days. Still in verse 55, many went up from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. Comment, Leviticus chapters 11 through 15 describe the multitude of circumstances that could render a person ceremonially unclean, and therefore ineligible to participate in holy activities, such as visiting the temple. A person might be unclean by participating in normal day-to-day events. Even accidentally touching a dead insect, for example, would render a person unclean, Leviticus 11:23 and 24. Or for another example, menses renders a person unclean, or even touching someone in menses, Leviticus 15:19. Therefore, a person had to consider himself ceremonially unclean all the time, except for when he took special care. Many are traveling to Jerusalem ahead of time, ahead of the Passover, to isolate themselves for purification. Verse 56. Then they sought for Jesus and spoke one with another as they stood in the temple, "What do you think, that he isn't coming to the feast at all?" Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had commanded that if anyone knew where he was, he should report it, that they might seize him. Comment, the chief priests and Pharisees issued an order that anyone knowing the whereabouts of Jesus should report it, but it's unclear if they issued the order only among themselves or to the public. Probably the order was just among themselves because there's no telling how the public might react. Therefore, they would want the arrest to be as low-key as possible. It'd be perfect if they could just make him disappear quietly, but God won't let that happen. In the end, it will be very, very public. John 12 is next at landofhavilah.net. John 12.